that's part of the problem. It's because you've got to continually be out there because people need to be reminded. A person needs to see something like 7 times before
exactly
they'll act on it. So the more your employees are out there talking about your brand and your services, your products, that's just hammering the numbers, right? There's more people, there's more voices talking about it rather than channeling everything through one marketing department. Now you're opening it up so that organic social media is being taken into account and dark socials being taken into account. People are corresponding with some of your employees on Twitter, right? In the back channel or on LinkedIn or on Facebook. They're reading blog posts. They're listening to podcasts. Your company now is almost everywhere, right? It's on all of these different platforms, through all these different voices, all these different people. It's a medley. It's not just laser focused, campaign oriented. Think of it as a bit broader than that.
Welcome to the Internal Marketing Podcast, the unique podcast series where we flip the marketing conversation from external to internal, exploring all the ways that companies can build a brand and drive growth by marketing to their most powerful brand advocates, their very own employees. I'm your host, Kerry-Ann Stimson, and I'm very happy to be bringing you this episode where we'll be discussing how you can leverage employees as influencers for the company brand. But before we get started, building an employee advocacy program doesn't just happen overnight. It means that you need to be creating a stream of positive, engaging content to get your employees bought in and to encourage them to start sharing it. The best place to create that content is with Workshop. Workshop is an internal email platform for creating beautifully branded employee-specific campaigns. Head on over to useworkshop.com/marketing to learn more and download their complete guide to building an employee advocacy program for your company. And of course, Workshop is the global sponsor of Season 3 of the Internal Marketing Podcast. Thank you, Workshop. I'm happy to have you on board. So let's jump into this conversation with my featured guest, Tom Augenthaler. Tom is the founder and chief consultant at 551 Media, and he'll be sharing how you can leverage your company's employees as influencers to help build the company brand. Hi, Tom. Welcome to the Internal Marketing Podcast. It's so great to have you.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. I know we're going to have a great conversation today, Tom. You and I met originally over LinkedIn, right? And we started to have a great conversation about influencer marketing, but not just influencer marketing in the traditional sense like we know it, but particularly influencer marketing within the context of recognizing that we don't always have to be going outside to look for influencers. We actually have a body of potential, if not existing, influencers among our very own employees. And a lot of companies don't realize that that's the case, and they're not leveraging it. And so that's the purpose of this conversation here today, is to really dig into helping more businesses, more companies understand how they can go about leveraging their very own employees as influencers for the company brand, and why that's just as good, if not, I'm going to argue better, than going outside and paying an influencer to do that. But we're going to get into that very shortly. But Tom, could you kick us off by just defining for us in your own words, based on your wealth of experience, what is influencer marketing exactly?
I'd be more than happy to. So influencer marketing is really just leveraging somebody else's expertise and allowing them to tell your story in their own way. So the way that usually manifests itself today in terms of marketing is we think of influencers as being people on social media who have large social media followings. So that could be on Instagram or TikTok or even LinkedIn, Facebook, places like that, Snapchat. So we think in terms of getting in front of those influencers or getting in contact with those influencers and briefing them and then getting them interested in promoting our product or our brand or talking about our company in some way or other. That's the way most consumer companies do it. So they contact these social media influencers who have large followings, whether it's fashion or beauty or travel or something like that. and they pay them to promote the brand, the product, whatever it happens to be. On the B2B side, it's quite different because it's not really determined by an influencer, is not determined by the size of the social media following necessarily, but it's more about expertise and authority within that industry. So many of the influencers on the B2B side are really independent analysts. Some of them are former journalists. Some of them are consultants. So it's really quite different over there. So you're really leveraging somebody else's expertise and you're briefing them and encouraging them to talk about your brand or your products or whatever it happens to be and evangelize that to their audience.
I'm glad you made the distinction because in the B2C and the B2B space, marketing space, there is quite a difference because I feel like in the B2C space, you're right, it's more so about the size of the following that the influencer has, because what you're really trying to do as a consumer products or even service kind of a company is you're just trying to get your product out there in front of as many people as possible, especially people who can influence consumer behavior. I also wanted to just ask a bit of, I guess, a sidebar question to that, because you spoke about B2B influencers being more so experts in their area. And I use the word thought leader sometimes. I mean, is there a difference in the B2B space, especially? Is there a difference between what an influencer is versus what a thought leader is?
That can be a distinction that comes up occasionally. I think we, as marketers, we tend to overuse words until they become meaningless. So sometimes the word thought leader gets batted around a lot. It's like the word solution or synergy or these different words that are actually pretty powerful words. We just overuse them as marketers. But some influencers are thought leaders. Absolutely. They're publishing books. They're doing public speaking. They're asked to speak at events, usually company events or industry events. They're asked to write white papers, things like that. So a lot of them are very analytical and very studious and publish a lot of material that way. And they're looked upon as being thought leaders. Not all of them are, of course, because I think being a true thought leader means that you're doing things like that.
Indeed. And that point you're just raising is a great segue into my next question is that why do you think that influencer marketing in the B2B way of speaking, why has it worked so well for brands in your view, in your experience?
I think it's worked well, or it works best, when the company recognizes that it's difficult to break through to the buyers, to the buying audience, and in a way that's meaningful and it's going to make a positive impact on them through content. We're all producing content like crazy these days. I mean, if you think about it, there was a thought leader some years ago named Tom Ferensky. He's a former journalist with FT, I think, and he started his own online outlet. I think it's called Silicon Watcher or Silicon, something like that. Anyway, Tom predicted some years ago, over 10 years ago, that every company was going to become a media company and that they were not just putting out press releases anymore. They were putting out content on blogs. They were doing sponsored articles more than ever. They were producing podcasts. They were doing all sorts of things to be able to inform and educate their buying audience about why their particular product solution was the one that they should be considering. I think that's rather prescient on his part. And I think that is part of it. So companies are up against a wall today because they're producing all this content, but not all of it resonates. It's not getting through to the buyers. So why isn't it getting through? Well, a lot of the content is really just not that insightful. It's not really helpful. And it talks too much about the company rather than the problems that the buyers are facing. That's where influencers come in. These people are more in touch with those problems that the buyers are facing. And because of that, they produce content that resonates with those people. Those people find it helpful. I mean, let's look at your podcast, for instance. You have a podcast. It's a successful podcast. It's a success because you're mindful of the problems and challenges that your audience faces. And you're trying to bring people onto the podcast that are going to help them through those problems and challenges.
So when we talk about influencer marketing then, Tom, and again, we know that the popular go-to approach is we're going to find somebody outside, usually, sometimes, and pay them a lot of money, maybe to generate content or what have you, to give the value that we want to give. And hopefully we can piggyback on the content that the influencer is creating as a brand in order to gain a wider share of mind, as it were. We know that the B2B space, there is a lot of value that can be derived when a company decides to say, look, I'm not going to go outside to get this influencer. I'm going to do it internally. I'm going to look within my own body of employees at different levels in the organization, maybe. I'm going to explore that. Why should more companies, you think, be looking to leverage their own employees as influencers instead of going outside?
That's a great question. If you think about it a little bit, and I've spent time just sort of pondering this, and I've been looking at different examples where this has been true. One of the things I've noticed is that you got a company, and that company is producing products, solutions, or services of some kind, and it tends to be very internally focused. So we get the research or we learn something from the customers that we want to serve. Okay, we're going to produce something that's going to solve their problems. Okay, great. Well, what we could do is learn how to talk about how we arrived at those solutions and why we think those solutions are the ones that are the best for this particular problem. And the people that are best at doing that are the people that actually do it. So if you think about it, I mean, when I worked at HP some years back, I used to marvel at, we'd be in these big meetings with like 20 people, and we'd be talking about some product or, how we were going to take it to market or whatever. And we'd have engineers at the table, and we'd have marketing people at the table, we'd have PR people at the table and whatever, and talking about the product and who we're rolling it out to, who's it really suited for. And I marveled at just the knowledge capital sitting around the table. And I was like, why aren't we using some of these people as spokespeople? Why is it always, there's usually a go-to person inside of a company or a few people that are usually the spokespeople, which is fine, which works. But what we're talking about is something a little bit more than just that, right? Than press opportunities or something for an interview or something. We're talking about, hey, what if Kerry-Ann, the engineer in this company, started a blog on the company blog, right, on the company website, and she wrote a blog post once a month, right, and talked about, these are the challenges a customer came to us with, and these are the ways that we surmounted those challenges and produced a product that solved those problems. That could be really interesting, right? That could be really interesting. Now, to the internal people, that sounds all very pedestrian, right? It sounds like, oh, well, we do it every day, it's not that interesting. The problem is that to the outside world, that's very interesting.
I think one of the things that stood out from something you said is the whole matter of authenticity, right? But particularly when you talk about taking your own people inside your company and using them as the influencers, allowing them to use their subject matter expertise through the content they produce, talking about the problems that we've been solving as a company and how we do what we do, the lessons learned, and putting that information out there as representatives of the company. I think it's very authentic. And certainly to me, that's one of the biggest benefits of leveraging your employees as influencers as opposed to just getting folks outside. My next question would be, how do I identify who these influencers could be? I mean, do you have to rely on the fact that they already exist and I just kind of go and find them and hope that there's somebody in the company already that produces a podcast or writes a blog? Or can we support a process of helping to create influencers out of our very own people?
That's a good question. I think that usually within an organization, there are people that you can kind of notice are a little more extroverted, I think, and they like to talk about things like this. Like they're always the first in the class to raise their hand when, hey, does anybody want to talk to the press on this issue? We have an inquiry. Yeah. A lot of times it's those people that, they're pretty eager to talk. They like to discuss things like that. They are pretty open about that. Those are people that are usually pretty easy to identify. There are also people that are a lot more quiet. They're not going to be so extroverted about it, but they would like to do something. And sometimes it's just a matter of putting out an inquiry and saying, hey, how many of you guys would be interested in is anybody here interested in blogging a little bit about what we're doing here and how we're helping customers, And you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. It's sometimes it's how you ask the question. It's not always we're looking for people internally to blog about the company, and we will compensate you accordingly for this. It's not that. It's, hey, is there anybody out there that would like to do some of this? We're thinking of implementing a new initiative to help people do it inside the company because you guys are experts at what you do. That's why we hired you. That's why we're good at what we do. It's because of all of you and all of your knowledge capital. Is anybody out there be interested in doing that? And then, maybe this could lead to other things. Maybe it's maybe we, depending on how it goes, maybe we, have you at some of our company events and we invite you to speak. Maybe it's getting you guys a little more integrated with the sales team, speaking to the sales team about things. Maybe it's including quotes from you in some of the press materials. Usually big companies think in terms of only the senior vice president of this is going to be the one who's quoted in the press release. And a lot of times that makes sense, but not all the time.
Right.
Not all the time. So if you enable your employees to become influencers, that they don't have to be big, huge influencers with 1 million followers. It's let them get out there a little bit and correspond and chat and talk about things.
I love that.
It's the buyers will find those people and be like, hey, this person over here really seems to know their stuff and they're with XYZ company. Maybe we should be looking at XYZ company.
Absolutely.
That's the way it works.
That's a power that really comes back to when we talk about employee advocacy and the power of employees to really carry a message of a brand in a way that's authentic, in a way that people trust. So I love what you said earlier, Tom. So clearly, it doesn't always have to be about the C-suite, right? You can really go about reaching out to employees who are willing to do something, whether it is they're the ones who want to be in front of the microphone, in front of the camera, or some people are just better at writing. The point is that there really is a way to reach out and encourage and engage people who want to be a part of the process. My next question is, Tom, what are some of the practical steps that a company can take when we talk about getting started with building a group of influencers from among its own employees? Just if you can kind of quickly, maybe the first 2, 3, maybe even 4 steps that a company can take to get that process going.
Yeah, the first thing is that upper management has to say, this is something we want to do and we encourage it. Second thing they need to do is provide guardrails around what these employees can say and not say. What can they talk about and not talk about? And typically employees have, they have a lot of knowledge about things. They have a lot of insight. They have a lot of exposure to things inside the company that are being talked about that maybe aren't really pertaining to their job. So again, you want to have top-down approval for all this to occur. You want to make sure that that's really encouraged. It's not just lip service, but it's something that the upper management says, we need to do more of this. So let's provide some guardrails that everybody can operate within, and then allow them or enable them to use certain platforms to do so. Maybe it's you want to confine it to Twitter and blogging and things like that at first, and then open it up a little bit more from then on. Maybe it's allowing some of the employees to create a private group on Facebook or something where they can talk about different problems and challenges in there. Maybe it's like somebody raises their hand and says, "Hey, I'd like to do a podcast. I have a few ideas for a podcast." Well, help them refine the idea a little bit, right? And then give them the tools to be able to do it. I think a lot of companies might say, "Well, hey, that's a great idea." Well, you're going to have to probably provide them with those technical tools to do it. And then you're going to probably have to provide them with some technical support, right? Sometimes, if you really want to get aggressive about it, you're going to want to put some compensation behind it. So here's some things that I've seen some other companies do is provide bonuses based on the kind of content they're putting out. If they're doing a blog, let's say the blog is once a month and it's 1,000 words per blog post. Okay. Well, you're going to probably want to help that person edit the blog post a little bit. So that's the kind of thing that can really take your company to the next level And that is some of the best marketing that could ever be done, right? And you're not really paying that much more for it if you think about it. Maybe you're just providing some guardrails, some parameters for them to operate within. Maybe you're providing some support, technical support, maybe some editing support and things like that. But you're really not, it's not like you're spending $20,000 on some influencer to
Yeah.
produce some, blog posts for you, right?
I appreciate everything you've shared here, Tom, because it ties back into the whole matter of internal marketing and how powerful a way it is for companies to not only engage, as you said, bring the people on board that you want to bring on board to be a part of your influencer group, but empowering them as well by giving them the tools that they need to be able to do that. How do I know whether it's working or not? What are some of the things that I can say, well, it's winning, whether it's a KPI metric, whatever?
Yeah. There's sometimes you have to look at positives and you look at negatives. And I'll explain to you what I mean by that. So, depending upon your goals and objectives, if your goal and objective is to drive brand awareness, you're not going to measure things, you're not going to do lead gen measurements based on that, right? So, it's dependent upon your goals and objectives. So, let's say that it's about brand awareness and building brand affinity, which many brands are struggling with today. How do we do that? Well, you're going to have to start listening to your customers a little bit better when they're coming in the door. So when you get sales inquiries, start listening about, well, how did you hear about us? Where did you learn about that product that we're doing? Where did you pick up on us? And you'll start learning about where they're going for their information and how they're educating themselves. You will still get some of this. I Googled this product, your company came up in search, boom, I went there. Marketing attribution software can track that, and they know that. However, what they don't track is it's like, well, I listened to this podcast with Kerry-Ann, and I heard this spokesperson talking about this, that, or the other thing, and I started to look into that a little bit. Didn't Google it, but I just went directly to the company website. Well, that doesn't get tracked, right? Or I'm in a private Facebook group, and my peers are in there, and I just posed a question, and some people got back to me with some of the solutions that they got, and your company was mentioned by somebody. So I decided to look into it. So that's why I'm reaching out to you now. Oh, okay.
There we go.
The other thing is if you're doing brand awareness and building brand affinity, it takes time. It's not something that's just, in 30 days, we solve that problem. Well, it's never really totally solved. That's part of the problem. It's because you've got to continually be out there because people need to be reminded. I think it's, the typical person needs to see something like 7 times before
exactly
they'll act on it, right? So the more your employees are out there talking about your brand and your services, your products, that's just hammering the numbers, right? There's more people, there's more voices talking about it rather than channeling everything through one marketing department. Now you're opening it up so that organic social media is being taken into account and dark socials being taken into account. People are corresponding with some of your employees on Twitter, right? In the back channel or on LinkedIn or on Facebook. They're reading blog posts, they're listening to podcasts. Your company now is almost everywhere, right?
Yeah.
It's on all of these different platforms, through all these different voices, all these different people. It's a medley. It's not just laser focused, campaign oriented. Think of it as a bit broader than that.
So, Tom, we've been talking a lot of great stuff here. I wanted to get a sense from you, in your experience, are there any pitfalls that anybody looking to do they should think about, before they hit the button to press go? I'm sure there's some lessons learned along the way that you'd probably share a few.
Yeah, I think there's a couple. One is, I mentioned it before, when you've got executive buy-in to the entire idea, right? So that is one thing. That's the permission to do it. If it's just sort of, oh, well, yeah, go ahead and do it, just don't screw up, nobody will do it because that's just based on fear. They're not going to do it. They're not being really encouraged or supported. They're not, most people will not do that. So that's the first thing. So executive buy-in, and really, it's got to be genuine buy-in. Yeah, we want to do this and we're going to support it and we're going to give you the tools and resources to do it properly. Yeah. The other pitfalls that a company can encounter too. One, you have an employee just go off the rails. So And that usually is a result of them not being given the proper guide rails or parameters to begin with. What I mean by people going off the rails is where they start out doing a blog, maybe they get a little attention, and then they start going off into all these other avenues about politics and religion and things like that. We want to stay away from those things, people, and we want to keep it narrowed down to we're going to talk about things that happen, on a day-to-day basis here in the company. If you want to have a blog about religion and politics, you don't do it on your own. That's fine. But,
go right ahead. And don't put our name on it. Don't put our name on it.
Don't put our name on it, please. Thank you very much. So that's one thing. The other thing is, the other pitfall is you start it, you encourage everybody to do it, they do it, and then they just sort of stop. So this happens with just regular people out there anyway, right? It's like they get all hyped up. They're like, yeah, I'm going to start a podcast. I'm a great podcast. It's going to be on this. And we're going to do this. We're going to have guests. And we're going to boom, boom, boom. And they do 10 episodes and then it just dies. It's gone, right? Now, things do come up, life challenges, career challenges. The person leaves the company, blah, 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 blah. But maybe you think about, if Kerry-Ann leaves the company and moves off and she was the host of the podcast, well, maybe we have somebody else as a backup host, right? Maybe we think about that, doing that. So think in terms of, you don't want people to be excited, start content, and then just drop it after a few blog posts or a few podcast episodes or something like that, because that doesn't look good for your company. You want something that's going to be consistent. You might start it with like this, because it can be overwhelming creating content. So you want to think of it in terms of, all right, Kerry-Ann's going to do a podcast on this topic, but she's going to limit it to 10 episodes. So the podcast is going to last for 10 episodes. And then we're going to publish it, right? And we're going to let it live there on the site. And then Kerry-Ann could go off and do something else after that. So think of it in terms of doing something more bite-sized, because then people can think, when you're creating the content or writing it, it's like, okay, I just have to do 5 blog posts. It's not a never-ending stream of blog posts. I'm going to do 5, a series on this topic. So think of boiling it down into more manageable nuggets, so that it's not, oh my gosh. I think that's what happens. A lot of people are like, yeah. And it's like, we want to do this. We want to do it. We could have all these guests on, everything else. And then it's like, when it comes to doing it, it's like, oh my gosh, this is taking more time than I thought.
Tell me about it.
And how am I going to ever get this done?
As a podcaster, I can identify, it can get overwhelming.
Yeah. So, but if you're thinking of it from an employee standpoint, do a podcast series of 10 episodes.
Yeah.
And you don't have to do it alone. It could be, you could have a co-host.
Yeah, split the work.
And it doesn't have to have guests. You could have the two of you just talking about, something that you encountered last week and talk through it. And maybe the podcast is just 20 minutes in terms of length or 15 minutes in terms of length. It doesn't have to be an hour. Think of it like that. So break it down, make it manageable so that everybody can get the work done. All right. And then you can get the content out there. They can start building a little bit of a following, right? Build some other relationships out there online that are going to benefit them and benefit the company too. So that's the way I would recommend doing it.
Love that. Love that. Thank you so very much. Tom, this has been such a rich discussion, and I'm so appreciative of everything you would have shared. And I'm thinking, well, this is my final nugget question, which I ask in every episode of every guest. And with so many nuggets that you would have shared, I don't know how you're going to do this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What, in your view, is the key takeaway? So of everything you would have shared, for the folks who have been listening, what, in your view, is the big takeaway or nugget that you would love them, if they don't remember anything else, this is the one thing you'd want them to come away with, having learned and listened to what you would have shared today?
Be consistent. Consistency. That's it. So if you're going to do the 10 episode podcast, be consistent. Do the 10 episodes. If you're going to do the 5 blog post series, be consistent. Do the 5 blog posts, right? See it through. If you're going to do something a lot more extended in terms of time, you got to be consistent.
Thank you so much. And I'd love to know, Tom, how can we, the internal marketing tribe, support you?
Well, you can visit my website. It's called the influencemarketer.com. There I've got blog posts and I've got other goodies up there. There's a couple of free things up there too, a free course, and there's some other things that people can grab, and I'll be adding to that in coming months. And then support me on LinkedIn. that's where I do a lot of my sort of social networking. That's where you and I
Yeah.
got introduced. It's through LinkedIn, and I love LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn's a
Awesome.
great social platform where people can learn things. And there's some junk on there too, but it's really not as bad as the other ones, right? I mean, especially for
Yeah.
business,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I find good articles on there. There's other interesting people to connect with.
Absolutely.
There's all sorts of opportunities on there to learn things and get informed. LinkedIn is a fabulous social media platform. So please visit my profile there and connect with me. You can find me under T. Augenthaler, my last name. And
there you are.
There I am.
There he is. And he's great at connecting. You're one of the handful of my LinkedIn connections who I can always rely on to be available. You answer messages. You are great at bringing people together, which is another thing. And I think that's great. And we definitely, guys, check out Tom's website, theinfluencemarketer.com.
Yep.
And also connect with him on LinkedIn. Absolutely. Well, Tom, thank you so much again for joining me here today. I really appreciate your taking the time and the energy to prepare and just join me here today. Of course, I can't do anything else but to wish you all the very best in everything that you do, and have a great one.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it, Kerry-Ann. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Internal Marketing Podcast. I hope you got some great takeaways from this conversation. And if you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, then please join the tribe. And don't forget, feel free to share this podcast with anyone whom you believe will find it valuable as well. I'm your host, Kerry-Ann Stimson, and I look forward to your joining me next time.